Good evening, everyone. I'm Jim Mayer. I am the training manager at Hurtigruten. Many years ago now, I went to drama school, and before I became a full-time guide, I worked in the theatre, television, and events industry for around 13 years. Most of that time, I was backstage behind the camera, and I couldn't help during that time to absorb many of the techniques and tips that the performers used to get the very best out of their shows. When I moved to work on board the ships, I started using those techniques in my presentations, and I found they worked. So the plan is that tonight I will share some of those tips with you. Now, it may appear that I am here alone, but I've got all of you out there watching me, and I'd like you to join in, if you like, as co-presenters using the chat function. So as we go through, pop into the chat function any examples of talks that you've done that have gone particularly well for a reason, or have they been a disaster? What lessons did you learn from them? Can you share those lessons learnt with your colleagues in the chat function? How did you get that talk back on track again? The chat function is also the place if you have any questions, and I'll do my best to answer a few of those at the end of the talk. Lauren is going to sort them all out for us, and then we'll look at them towards the end. Tonight, I'm going to divide the talk into 3 parts. I'm going to begin by talking about how best to prepare our heads and our bodies to give a good performance. Then we're going to look at how we make a good connection with the audience, because that's really key. And at the end, I'm going to consider slides. Do we really need slides? And if you think that you want to wean yourself off slides, then I've got some tips for how you can do that. So let's begin with the head. You will make a much better presentation if you can empty out all the distractions from your head and bring to the very front of it the talk that you are about to give. I'd like to tell you how actors do that when they are preparing to go on stage in a theatre. In the theatre, we have a thing called the half-hour call. And the half-hour call is literally an announcement on the tannoy that says to everyone, there's half an hour to go before curtain up. The strange thing about the theatre is that the half-hour call actually happens 35 minutes before the performance begins. I know, but it's theatre. There's loads of weird traditions there. In that time, during that half-hour call, the actors will begin that process of emptying out their head and getting ready for the show. Here's what you should be doing in that half hour on board the ship before your talk. First of all, make sure that all your technology is working. Get everything set up. We've all been to those talks where the presenter is down the front. It should have started 5 minutes ago, and they're still apologetically plugging in their laptop. So remove that distraction from your preparation by doing it right at the beginning of that half hour. Once you're set up, I suggest that you leave the venue where you're going to present. Give yourself some physical space away from the presentation venue. During that time, it's a good idea not to eat and not to drink things like coffee or alcohol. If I drink caffeine before a talk, I know that I'm going to be talking far too quickly for my audience. I'll be too hyper. So refrain from those sorts of things. Another thing to do during that 30 minutes is to run the beginning of your talk. By run, I mean say it out loud as though you were talking to an audience. Some people like to do that in front of a mirror, but it doesn't really matter. Just speaking out loud the beginning of your talk. You should have learned this part by rote. You shouldn't need to refer to notes for the beginning segment of your talk, because that's a really important time to make the connection with your audience. So you need to have eye contact with your audience during the beginning of your talk. Therefore, learn it, no notes. And we all know that if you start off the talk well, with a well-rehearsed opening, the rest of it is just going to roll on from there. So it's really worth investing that time in the beginning. So far, you're thinking that's all probably common sense. And here are some bits that actors would use. They would do a vocal and a physical warm-up before giving their performance. Now, you might think that's over the top before you give a talk on board a ship, but it isn't. It is well worth doing. For example, you wouldn't go for a 35-minute run without warming up your legs and giving those muscles a stretch. So you shouldn't start using your voice without warming up your voice, first of all. There's plenty of advice on places like YouTube on how to do it, but here's a quick summary and a few techniques that I use. Begin with some gentle humming. Doesn't matter what the tune is. It could be your national anthem if you're supporting your team at the Euros. That's quite appropriate. Could be your favorite pop song. Anything you like, just hum it through to yourself. Then you want to think about exercising the muscles around your mouth. So exercises such as going ooh-ah, woo-ah, ooh-ah, woo-ah, just to loosen up the cheeks and the jaw. We can start to exercise the tongue and the lips with a little tongue twister. One that I use is the lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue, the lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue, the lips, the teeth, the tip of the tongue. Then what we want to do is to start to connect our brain with our mouth, so that as we are visualizing the words that we want to say, they are coming out of our mouth in the way that we want to say them. And for that, I use another tongue twister. This one goes like this. It is unique New York, unique New York, unique New York. And if you think that's easy, then after 3 times, switch it around. So you then have New York, unique, New York, unique, New York, unique, unique, New York, unique, New York. This will start, as I say, to connect brain with mouth. The words that you want to come out will come out in the way that you want them to. So that's okay for mouth, but what about the rest of the body? How is your body affecting your performance? Well, it's all to do with breathing and a bit of posture. So for breathing, what we want to do is to do some stretches that open up the intercostal muscles on the side. And also think about your back, stretching your back, and that's all connected with legs as well. So I tend to do a very gentle stretching routine, just 5 minutes long, working from one end of the body to the other. If you're going to use your voice for 35 minutes, you want the power for that to be coming from your stomach. So by loosening everything up, opening it up, that's where the power will come from. You won't be straining up here. Talks can be a little bit stressful, and you will feel that stress in the small of your back. So again, by loosening up before the talk, you're going to relieve any tension that you feel during the talk. Having made these preparations, the result is that we will have, hopefully, a calm body and an energized mind. So we will be ready to go with the talk at the front of our brain. It's also important to get into character before you start. It's no use just before going on stage to give a talk about Franklin. It's no use to be chatting with the receptionists about the latest boy band. Think about the subject that you're going to be delivering. Now, why do we want all this space in our head? What's that going to be used for? The idea is that when you give your talk, you should be able to split your head into 2. One half is giving the talk. The other half is listening to yourself giving the talk and providing feedback on how you're doing. The other half of the brain should be checking the audience. How are they reacting to it? How is it going? You need to be listening to your pace, to the tone that you're using, and constantly readjusting your delivery. You want to keep things lively. If you're delivering the talk on autopilot because you haven't taken the time to calm your mind and prepare your body, you're not going to be able to do that. So give yourself time before the talk to get your head organized. One of the last things I do, almost just before I start, is I always clean my teeth before I give a talk. I don't believe there is any scientific basis for this, but it makes me feel better. It's just part of my routine. Maybe if I think that if my mouth feels fresh, the words that are coming out are going to be good. It's just a little habit I've got. I recommend it to everyone. So we've done all these preparations, and one additional one, the last thing I did after cleaning my teeth, I put on a couple of tunes that I like. Today it was a band called 30 Seconds to Mars. So something a bit lively, something you can sing along to. Again, that'll help with the warm up and preparing you for the talk. And then you're on stage and you've got your audience in front of you. And maybe it's your first time, or maybe you haven't done very many talks and you're nervous. How best to deal with nerves? People say that you should imagine your audience naked. I'm not so sure that that would be very good. I would find that a bit distracting. But what I do is I hold the thought in my head that both me and the audience, we want the same thing. We both want a really good, entertaining talk. So therefore, we're on the same team here. We're going to support each other in this endeavor. So if you are suffering with nerves, just hold that thought in your head. So here we are now, we are considering audience, part 2. It's really important before you start your talk to just think for a moment of the context in which you're giving it. For example, if your audience have just had a wonderful wildlife sighting, maybe some nice whales close to the ship, they're going to be in a very different place to an audience that are stuck on board the ship because maybe, unfortunately, you're having to steam up to Frey to do a medevac. So context is important. You need to adapt what you are saying to the now. So demonstrate some empathy with the audience at the beginning, and you will begin to forge that connection with them, and then you'll be able to tell your story. Now, I mentioned earlier that it's important to learn the beginning to get that off to a good start with eye contact. But let's just think about the few seconds before that. I prefer not to be in the room, maybe off stage or just outside the room. Let the audience come in. And then, a bit like we've done this evening, just a minute or two after the advertised start time, I will come on to stage or to the front of the room, ready to give the talk. Stand for a couple of seconds, look at the audience, they'll quieten down, and you begin. What we're doing there is giving a real clear signal to the audience that we're about to start. If I've been at the front of the room, maybe chatting with people as they've been coming in, the signal isn't quite so clear. The reason I like that clear signal at the beginning, the standing for a moment, pausing, letting the room settle, is it gives an impression to the audience of credibility, that you know what you're doing, that you're going to own this space, that you've got confidence to deliver your talk. And you've given the audience that feeling before you've even opened your mouth. So try that one next time you're starting a talk. A signal that often is given at the beginning of a talk is the fading of the lights. It's a signal that we're starting that's common for theatre and cinema, but I don't think it's that appropriate when we're giving talks on board ship. You've probably all had somebody fall asleep in your talk. If you haven't, you will do if you stay in the business long enough. But of course, by turning down the lights, you are encouraging that. Another reason not to turn down the lights is it reduces the contact between you and the audience. You might be able to see the front row in the glow from the screen, but beyond that, you can't see them. So keep the lights up. It helps maintain connection with the audience. On many ships these days, talks are streamed from the lecture venue to the cabins. And in order for that to be effective, you're probably going to have the lights up anyway. So get used to talking in the light. And a word on streaming: if you are streaming to the cabin, treat the camera as though it is a member of the audience. So every now and again, as you're going around the room with your eyes to the audience, look to where the camera is as well, so that you talk directly to those people that are listening to you from their cabins. Now, I've been talking a bit about signals here, and audiences are ready for signals. There are certain things that they are expecting to be in a talk, certain signals that they're looking out for. They're expecting you to ask them to think. They're expecting on occasions to be able to laugh. And they're also expecting at the end, if you've been any good, to be able to clap. And it helps with a talk to give signals to the audience of what they should be doing at different times. So I've got a couple of examples on this to help your talk. I'm going to give you two alternate suggestions for a phrase in a talk about an epic expedition. Phrase one that you might choose to use is something like this: by the end of the trek, cannibalism was the only way to get food. Or an alternative you could use is this one: at this point in the expedition, the remaining explorers were forced to turn to the only food source they had left, and they began to eat the decaying flesh of their recently deceased friend. Now, just saying that has given me goosebumps. I don't know how it's making you feel. It's quite unimaginable. So in that second example, I used various different techniques to help get the point over to the audience in a slightly better, slightly more dramatic way. First of all, I took a bit of care over the writing of that sequence. It gradually built up in horror. So not only are we eating flesh, but it's decaying, and it's a recently deceased person. And at the very end of the sentence, we put the word friend for maximum impact. So thinking about your writing of your talk will help with the delivery of it in situations like that. Then I put into it how it was making me feel. So I said about the goosebumps, and I asked the audience to think how it was making them feel. It's okay to make those direct appeals to your audiences, and it will really enliven their thought processes and the images that they've got in their head. You also notice that I slowed down through that phrase. A very simple technique, just adds in a bit of drama. I can't do it here today. I've got to stay in the right place for the camera. But if you were doing that live, think about moving forward towards the audience as you do it. Close that gap. Makes people feel a bit scared and uneasy. And so they should if they're thinking about eating their friend. Another example you might like to use, this is from the introductions, and on every ship I've ever worked on, there is a Muppet show at the beginning where we all line up and say who we are and what we do. And you could say, hello, I'm Jim. I am the expedition historian. I've been lucky enough to go to Antarctica many times, and I'm sure we will have a super voyage this time too. Alternatively, you might liven it up a little bit. Hello everyone, I'm Jim, and I am here to tell you stories of the great explorers, but also some explorers that you have probably never heard of. And do you know what? This crossing of the Drake Passage is in fact my 100th crossing. So what I've done there is to sow some seeds for future talks. Basically, it's a bit of self-advertising, isn't it? But why not? To say, I'm not just going to tell you the stuff you're expecting. I'm going to tell you something else, some unusual things as well. And then with the end of the phrase, rather than just saying, I've done lots of things, I've got lots of experience, I've involved the audience by suggesting that I'm telling them a secret. Do you know what? And then if you go up at the end of a phrase, my 100th crossing, and then pause, that's a clear signal to the audience that it's their turn. They can react to that, and they might a little cheer or a round of applause. So drawing them in, making them feel part of the proceedings. If you do that with your audience, you're going to gain energy from them. There's going to be a bit of to and fro. It's a two-way process. That's a good thing to do. Just a little word on those techniques. You need to treat them a bit like Marmite or Vegemite for those of you down south. Spread them thinly. If you overdo them, you will dilute the effect, and everybody knows what's happening. They're expecting you to do it then. Finally, let's consider slides. It's quite rare for a speaker on board ships not to have slides, but I don't think that you always need to have them. Let me just say at the beginning that, of course, some subjects really do need to have slides. If you're helping your audience to differentiate between different species of whale or birds, then yeah, you're going to need some slides to be able to show the different characteristics. But if you consider stories, such as fairy stories, folk tales, that sort of thing, often I would suggest that they are better without slides. Think of them a bit like a bedtime story that might have been read to you, and you were using your imagination to come up with the pictures. So why not let our audiences do that? For example, I tell a story on board about the hidden people in Iceland, and I do that without slides because, well, I haven't got any pictures of the hidden people in Iceland, funnily enough. The only pictures that do exist are from other people's imagination. So I leave it to the audience to come up with their own images of the hidden people. Many of you will tell personal stories on board the ships. They're great. They might be a story of an epic expedition crossing Greenland ice cap or an overwintering. And if you're telling one of those stories, consider just using maybe 5 or 6 well-chosen slides, because then each of those pictures will have much more of an impact. When you use slides, we actually ask our audience to split their focus. Some of the time they're looking at you. As soon as you change the image, their focus goes onto the screen. So consider when in your talk you are going to transition from one slide to another. And if a new slide is particularly complex or requires reading, then stop talking for a moment or two. Let the audience take in the slide. I would argue, to make your presentation stand out, ditch some of the slides. As my colleague John says, you are the presentation. You are the person that people have come to see. Often, most of our pictures they can find online. So how should you make this transition? If you want to reduce your slides, how are you going to do it? I would suggest starting off by inserting blanks into your presentation. So there will be places in your presentation where the screen behind you goes black. And of course, where are the audience going to look? They're going to focus on you. Gives you the chance to make a much better connection with them. Now, some speakers feel that they can't possibly do without the presentation, without the PowerPoint or the keynote, because it's the rails on which the talk runs. And I have a bit of sympathy with that. You've probably noticed this evening that I've been using some notes, and occasionally you'll see me move them out the way. So these things are helpful. They will keep you on track. But what you can do if you're weaning yourself off slides is run the presentation, but just for yourself. Maybe you don't need to show the pictures to the audience, and you've still got the script on the laptop in front of you. And a final point about ditching the PowerPoint is that performers rehearse. So if you are going to get rid of scripts and PowerPoints and things like that, you will have to put a bit more effort into the rehearsal process. And there is a trick to this as well. Television producers, when they are script writing, will agonize over the links. Most stories are made up of chapters, and it's easy for our brains to remember the individual bits of the chapter. But the bits that are hard for us to remember are the links that join those 2 or 3 chapters together. So in your script writing, and if you're using notes like I am, concentrate on the links. Make sure the links stand out for you. Those are the bits you will forget most easily. And those are also the bits that are most important to the audience as you lead them through the talk. So rehearse your links. So just to recap then, prepare your mind and your body before the performance. Take that half an hour before performance, get the text sorted and out the way, and then forget about it. Give yourself space, do a warm-up, get the body warmed up so that it's breathing properly, get the mind empty so that there's space in there for the talk on one side and the monitoring of the talk on the other side. Forge a connection with your audience. Do that from the beginning, but with a well-rehearsed beginning that allows you to look at the audience and give them chance to respond with laughs, clapping, thinking. That will help keep the bond between the two of you to keep strong. And finally, think about slides. Do you really need slides? If you are using slides, do you need that many? If you can reduce the number of slides, the ones you have will make a bigger impact. And if you're telling a story, maybe you can do without slides altogether. That's all I've got for you this evening, short and sweet. So I'm just going to check with Lauren here if there are any questions. And there's one here from Flo. It said, how would you deal with multiple questions during a presentation? Answer them, remember them. How would you do it? I would be in favor of setting the rules for the audience. And some talks are better with questions at the end. I didn't want, this evening is a good example, I didn't want to have to be concentrating on talking to you, because I'm here on my own, and reading the questions at the same time. So I chose to say, I'll deal with all the questions at the end. Some talks are better if the audience have the chance to ask questions in the middle. For example, if they're referring to that slide of the whale and why does it have the white bits there, that sort of thing. And I've had occasions, I'm sure you have as well, where you get a persistent questioner, someone that keeps going and keeps going and keeps going. And so you have to, for the sake of the whole audience, acknowledge that they've got some really good questions, and you'd love to be able to answer them all, but dinner's going to be served soon, so maybe we'll have a chat afterwards. It is tricky to remember multiple questions, so if you're getting lots of them in the middle of the talk and they're interrupting, just ask the folk to put them at the end. So Lauren says to me, oh, no more questions. Then she says one more. Here we go. This is a late entry and possibly the last one. It says, how do you deal with a very small audience? Do you change the way you are giving your talk? And it goes on to say that weirdly they feel uncomfortable in front of an audience of just 3 or 4 people, and more comfortable with a larger audience. Years and years ago in the theatre, we used to say that we wouldn't go on stage unless the number of people in the audience exceeded the number of people on stage. And generally speaking, you're on your own when you're giving a presentation. And so even if there's only one person in the audience, give the talk. And yes, of course, make it a bit more intimate. Maybe on that occasion, I'd sit down with them in order to make it feel a bit more comfortable. Don't forget with streaming that you might actually have a live audience of none in the lecture room with you, but 100 people in their cabins watching your talk. So if it's on the schedule and advertised, do your talk, and yes, adapt it for the people that are there. Well, questions coming in thick and fast now. So George says, any tips on presenting during rough weather? Yes. If you are not going to be able to do it, if you're going to be unwell, don't do it. Most of us, touch wood, have got our sea legs now, and we will know when we're going to be okay. So if you're going to be okay, do the talk. But a bit like the questions, give the audience permission right from the start. I normally say something like, if any of you feel unwell, please just go. Don't feel embarrassed. Don't worry about climbing over your fellow audience members. You just go and have a lie down, because we've all been seasick and we all know it's horrible. So just go. But I refer to my beginning point, George. If you're not well, don't do it. What length do you think is the best one? Which should not be exceeded? So at Hurtigruten, we say 30 to 35 minutes for your talk plus 10 minutes for questions. So we're aiming for 45 minutes sort of contact time with the audience. And there's a logistical reason for that, which is that it means that each hour we can start something new. And there's also the psychological reason for that is audiences can't really concentrate for longer than that sort of duration, 35 minutes or so, which is why I've aimed for this talk to be that long today. How do I refocus on a talk when you have the well-known off moment where you can't find the words, have technical problems, etc.? This is where that 30 minutes beforehand helps so much. I went off piece twice in the talk that I've just done, and I know where it was, and I had to say to myself, that's fine, just keep going. Probably 1 or 2 of you have noticed when that was, and that's what I'm holding on to, the fact that people generally don't notice if you go a little bit off piste. You've noticed it. Just bring yourself back on, keep going. So hold the thought that people don't notice. Second point on that, let's say, for example, there's a fly buzzing around in here. I would be the only one to notice that. And what I've got to do is ignore it. If I say, oh, there's a fly in here, it's a distraction to you as well, to the whole audience. So don't bring distractions to the audience's attention that they may not have noticed. If you've got a little minor distraction, acknowledge it in your head, put it to one side in your head, keep going. I'm not sure how many more I should do, Lauren. There's loads now. How do you deal with the cultural differences? Feeling less confident when I speak a foreign language in combination with a difficult audience. I'm the wrong person to ask because I can only speak the Queen's English, I'm afraid. What you do need to bear in mind is speed of delivery in whatever language you're going, because you may have people listening in their second language. So speed of delivery, explaining any technical words, of course. If you're talking about parts of an animal and so on, just take your time with those. I used to use bits of poetry in some talks, and if they had odd words in them, I would put them on the screen, because then people have got the combination of listening and reading, and that sometimes helps with different languages. Another thing to bear in mind is you may be working with a simultaneous interpreter, and these guys are amazingly skilled. They will listen to what you're saying and at the same time say it out in a different language. So it could be that half of your audience are listening, for example, in German, whilst you're delivering a talk in English. I'd like to give a couple of tips for dealing with interpreters. First of all, share your presentation with them before the talk. Sit down with them, give them the PowerPoint if you're using that, or the script if you've got it, and talk through the script with them. They will give themselves then, they will be giving a much better presentation or performance. And remember that their voice is what half of your audience are listening to. So really invest your time with the simultaneous translator. Second point on that is, if you're telling a joke, you will get 2 laughs from the audience. One will come about 3 seconds after the first. So just be ready for that and wait for it. And then last one from Vivi, how do you deal with people talking during your presentation? Yes, people talking or standing up and taking a picture and then sitting down, things like that. I'm quite diplomatic with that, but firmish. So it is distracting to the other folk in the audience. So if you notice it, let it go for a little bit, because it could just be that they're having a problem. He's dropped his hearing aid down in between the seats and he can't find it and all that. You give people time. If it is persistent, then it is probably worth gently asking them to stop. You might do that one-to-one, first of all, just bend down to them, or you might make an announcement to everybody. Something that I see not happening, that could happen a bit more in those situations, is colleagues. So if I'm up the front talking and there is a little problem going on in the audience, if you as another guide are in that audience, please you go and fix it, because then I can keep on with my talk. 80% of the audience will be listening to me. You'll fix the little problem that's happening down there. Everybody's happy. So that was the last question, and normally at this point in a Guides Inside talk, I would be telling you what's happening next week. Next week, you all get the week off. There is no talk next week. This is the last one in the series. So I would just like to say a few thank yous. Firstly to Lauren, who does all the technology and arranging and booking of the speakers. So thank you for that. And of course to the PTGA for putting this series up and hosting everything. And the last one is a thank you to you, the audience, and to all the speakers in the series. I hope you've enjoyed them all. That's it from me. Thank you very much. Good evening.